Everybody has opinions on sequels. Some people want nothing more than their favorite show to get a reboot or another movie in that franchise to come out. But then some people truly want nothing more than for that to never happen. I'm normally somewhere in between these two things. For instance, I want nothing more than a lot of my favorite games to get a new iteration, but as soon as a series starts taking any sort of nosedive in quality, I'm immediately in the second camp, 100%. An example of this is the Fallout series. I'm a huge Fallout nerd. Fallout New Vegas is still my favorite game of all time. When 4 was about to come out, I had a countdown timer like on my phone. I walked 5 miles to my friend's house just to watch him play it because he got it early. And I've only ever pre-ordered 2 games before, which was Fallout 4 and Smash Ultimate. When I got Fallout 4, I just really didn't like it. Like the story was bad, the character designs weren't that great, the simplification of everything that made it an RPG was just awful. So since then, I've just been in the camp of just hand Fallout to Obsidian or quit the series, please. Now, obviously they never will because the series makes way too much money, but if we're talking just about pure quality, the Fallout series should have ended a long time ago. But what about sequels for games that don't really have stories? What about games that are just pure gameplay loops? How do you make a sequel without just re-releasing the same game at that point? So today we're going to be talking about roguelikes and their sequels. We're going to specifically focusing on 2 series that I think have done it perfectly. So we're going to talk about the Spelunky series and the Darkest Dungeon series. Let's get into it. So for anyone who isn't interested in gaming, you may not know what a roguelike is. So I'll explain it very quickly. A roguelike is a game with permadeath, with procedurally generated levels, and they also tend to be really hard. Literal, like, CBT levels of difficulty. Also, they generally are dungeon crawlers, have grid-based combat, and can be very roleplay heavy depending on the game. Fun facts about the origins of the name roguelike, though. It all comes from the 1980 game Rogue, which was made in ASCII 2. So the name roguelike is literally just saying this game is like the game Rogue. Anyways, Darkest Dungeon is basically a textbook example of what a roguelike is in a lot of ways, whereas Spelunky is a bit different. It is a platformer, although everything is still procedurally generated, permadeath, and very hard, and so people still count it as a roguelike, and I would tend to agree with that. Not only that, but it's also literally in the wiki article about roguelikes. Anyways though, now that we're all caught up on what a roguelike is, let's talk about sequels. So the main thing that makes roguelikes completely different from any other gaming genre is that roguelikes are basically pure gameplay. Well, not even just purely gameplay, but pure gameplay loop. Most sequels, when they happen, all they really change is like a story, and then they make some quality of life changes in the gameplay and the aesthetic, and that's really it. I mean, look at Halo. Every game plays about the same with minor changes here and there. The only thing that is effectively changed is the story. You can also see this in The Last of Us 2. The gameplay loop is the same as the first one with just a different story. Meanwhile, Spelunky's story is basically, there's something calling you into these caves, may it be riches or secrets, you've been drawn to explore it. And Darkest Dungeon's story is basically, wow, the whole world is absolutely fucked and we should try and fix that. Trust me, there's not much more than that. What I'm trying to point out is that roguelike stories are extremely simple, and what people generally stay around for is just purely the gameplay. I mean, the reason I have 316 hours in Spelunky 2 is because of the gameplay loop and how fun running the game is. And the reason I have 90 hours in Darkest Dungeon 1, even though I only started playing it a year ago, is the gameplay loop. Even though the levels are procedurally generated, honestly, every run is roughly the same in a lot of ways, or at least in terms of general gameplay. So the question is, how can people love a game where every run feels roughly the same? And I'll tell you how. The game is really fucking hard. If the game is difficult, then the gameplay loop is always fresh because you're always consistently making more and more progress to get further and further into the loop. So all of this is to say, if you try to make a sequel to a game that's just gameplay, you're opening yourself up to a lot of risk. Because there's really only 3 options you can go to. You either, 1, don't change much at all and basically re-release the game but slap a 2 on it and update the graphics. 2, you change everything and take a chance on a whole new game basically, with the possibility of the whole community not liking what you've come back with. and 3 change just enough and add some new mechanics so that it feels like a new game, but still has the same core ideals of the previous game. And it's a very fine line to ask a game dev to follow. How much is too much? How much is too little? It's far more likely you'll get option 1 or 2 before getting 3. But I think I've asked enough rhetorical questions so far, so let's talk specifically about the Spelunky series up first. Something I should say right away. I am well aware that Spelunky has 3 games in this series: Spelunky Classic, Spelunky HD, and Spelunky 2. But for the purposes of this, I'm only going to be talking about HD and 2, and this is because a lot of the changes that were made between Classic and HD were mainly quality of life changes that Derek was able to make because he had Microsoft backing him, as well as not having to make the game in GameMaker anymore. So we're going to just stick to HD and 2. So already, let's take a look at the graphical upgrades and the art differences between the 2 games. Now, Spelunky 2 looks so sharp in comparison. I love the art for HD, don't get me wrong, but 2 just looks really sharp and refined, whereas 1 looks kind of thrown together, which I think fits the vibe for that game 100%. Also, I just really like Derek's art style, honestly. It's just really fun and cartoony in a really pleasant and unique way. So, I don't know, I just want to say that too. Anyways, with that out of the way, let's talk about actual mechanics and such that are different. I think the biggest difference in between HD and 2 is the actual speed values of the Spelunker man himself. Main couple of things is that in 2, you whip faster, run faster, climb way faster, and move in the air faster. Like, everything having to do with your character is just faster, and I honestly really like that. It may be hard for beginners to control, but once you master the move, it just feels so smooth. I will say the one thing that is slower in 2 is the arrow traps. I mean, look at how fast they go in HD. Jesus fucking Christ, dude. Another thing that they changed that I really like is that they made the backwards hitbox on the whip way more consistent so that people could reliably use it. And Mossrock and Blitworks also saw that people really liked the complexity of the secret ending of HD, so they made another one for 2, as well as one that goes even deeper into as well. They basically just doubled down on the secret endings of Spelunky HD, which is really cool. They also made shops easier to deal with in Spelunky 2. In Spelunky HD, it was kind of hard to rob shops, and then when you would have to deal with the shopkeeper for the entire rest of the run, just always aggroed on you. In Spelunky 2, I feel like the shopkeepers are harder to deal with in a fight, but can de-aggro on you and are easier to rob, which I think is a nice trade-off. They also made poison and curse effects in 2. Poison obviously takes your health down over time, and curse brings your health down to 1, and you cannot be healed over 1 until you make sacrifices to Kali. They also made an elemental reaction system in 2 as well. Like, if fire touches your jetpack, it explodes. A couple completely new worlds as well, new creatures, new mission storylines, just a lot. They made a lot of new stuff for this game, but in the end, the core concept is still the exact same. You're trying to get as far into the cave as possible to find the treasure and escape. And the game still ultimately plays the same. It's still a platform roguelike, just with a lot of new content on top of it. This matched with an online mode and consistent patches being made to keep the game not only alive but thriving. Speaking of patches, I will say that the reason why Blitwork is probably my favorite indie dev company ever, they went back 7 years after the last patch update for Spelunky 1 and re-updated it, adding some new translations for new languages, as well as fixing a couple bugs, but keeping the whole rest of the game the same. God, I love Blitworks so much. They just listened to fans and added some quality of life things that people really liked, added some new things to make the game a bit deeper in terms of gameplay experience, but kept the core identity the exact same. Now look, it may seem like I'm saying that Spelunky HD isn't as good as Spelunky 2, because I've only really been talking about the things that have been improved upon, but HD was my introduction to the series, and honestly playing it for this video, it still feels good. It still feels really fun to play. When Spelunky 2 came out, I fully expected it to either be the exact same game or maybe even worse, because I couldn't really see how they could make HD better. But then, you know, they did. What am I trying to say by listing off all these things that they have accomplished? I'm trying to say that an indie company succeeded at something that most AAA companies consistently fuck up on. Oh, also play Spelunky 2. Anyways, let's move on to Darkest Dungeon.
Claim your birthright and deliver our family from the ravenous, clutching shadows of the Darkest Dungeon.
So first off, let's do the same thing we did for Spelunky here and look at the art difference. So here's the thing, I really liked 1's art, and if it was just for visual art, I think I'd like it more. But because it's attached to a game, I think 2's art works way better for that. And also, we can't go on longer without appreciating the amount of work it must have taken to revamp the animations for this game. In 1, the animations were really stiff and really just kind of like moving PNGs almost, but it made each hit feel extremely heavy with how it punched into the screen. So the way they updated their animations but still made it feel just as heavy was just a perfect solution. It still feels like everything has weight and everything has consequences without it just being a still image with light movement, you know? Also, the idle animations for each of the characters, they're just so awesome, as well as the animations that happen when you're hovering over a move, when they're like preparing to do the move. Oh, so good. Art-wise, Darkest Dungeon 2 has a lot of sick stuff to look at, but I can go on forever and ever and ever. So let's get on to the mechanics, for God's sakes. So unlike the Spelunky series, the changes in this series are a lot more in your face. Instead of having a hub town and going out to dungeons just to like walk around and stuff, now you're traveling the lands in a cart and staying at hotels along the way. There's also no weapon or armor upgrades anymore. Instead, you master a move that you have. Like, I can master plague grenades for my plague doctor, but that's it. You can't upgrade the weapon or anything like that. You can also upgrade your cart to hold more things and produce stuff as well. Now listen, in a way, it can sound like they removed some features with that, but actually I think that the simplification of a lot of these features kind of helps in a strange way, because instead of grinding those things out, like grinding out upgrading your blacksmith and grinding out all these characters to get them up so that you can keep upgrading their weapons and stuff, you can just focus on the main goal of progressing through the story. Another thing they changed is that the party mates have relationships with one another's, and instead of a sanity bar filling up and resulting in either an affliction or an affinity, you gain either good points or bad points between each party member. If the relationship bar fills up with positive points, then you gain an affinity relationship like respected, inseparable, or others. And then if it fills up with bad points, you get a negative relationship like paranoid, hateful, or tumultuous. Instead of having an affliction happen when stress builds up, you have a meltdown, which gives you a bunch of debuffs, causing your party sanity to go down, as well as making every single one of your relationships with your other party mates go down as well. You know what, here's some footage to show you. I can find plenty, trust me, it happens almost every goddamn run. So these are all pretty major things to change in the series, right? But the core of the series is still the same as before. 4 heroes trying to rid the world of darkness, coming together and trying to stay as sane as possible. It's also still piss fucking hard. I'm having the same amount of issues with the ending of the Act 1 in Darkest Dungeon 2 as I did with the end of the game of Darkest Dungeon 1. Like, it is piss fucking hard. Or I can't tell if it's really the same level of difficulty or if it's just because the Darkest Dungeon 2 is so new and I'm still trying to figure out strats, but by God does it feel just as hard. But also it feels just as fun. I also really like the new class that they added to the game as well. The Runaway is such a cool class, honestly. I love using her. In total though, they kept Darkest Dungeons mostly the same, just changing some functions here and there. Changing out some stuff works to keep it fresh, but it's still a very challenging roguelike dungeon crawler at the end of the day. Also, can I praise the narrator? Killing the vibe the entire way through Darkest Dungeon 1 and 2. I mean, the sound design in general, honestly, just really takes the game to a whole new level. Also, in Darkest Dungeon 2, they added some new areas, and the design is so cool. Tons of unique enemies and events in each area, and it makes the area totally worth exploring. The only things I'd really change so far about Darkest Dungeon 2, before I go on, keep in mind that the game is still in early access technically, so this is all subject to change. But the first thing I would change is I hope they just add more classes. I know they said they would, but I just hope they follow through on that. I mean, that was the best part of Darkest Dungeon 1 for me, was the variety of different weird teams you could build. And the other thing is making a way for players to be able to sell items. I kind of hate that I just have to toss these items that I'm not using. I would really like to gain something for picking them up from fights or desperate few encounters. It just kind of sucks that I have to toss them, you know? Otherwise though, everything about this game to me is absolutely amazing. Overall, I think sequels are really tough to do for roguelikes. Although because of the fact that they're so tough, I think this quote from the greatest savage of our lifetime really does apply here.
I'm living in a nightmare, but the cream will rise to the top, oh yeah.
Like I said before, it's hard to make a sequel to a gameplay loop, more or less. But I think, honestly, that's kind of a pro in a way. So because the gameplay has to feel right for people to even care about the game, that's where all the resources for the game goes. Some goes to art as well, obviously, but the majority, I imagine, probably goes towards developing the actual gameplay. But anyways, to me, I think these two series are perfect test studies and perfect examples of series done right. I don't think one has missed in either of these series in the entirety of their existence. I honestly do think that other game dev companies can look towards these two companies and take notes about how to do a proper sequel. But man, what a tightrope walk to do. I do not envy game devs for these types of games. It's just wild that like my two favorite indie games that to ever have come out both got sequels just a year apart. And then those sequels just blew expectations out of the water. Not only that, but these are the best sequels I've ever played for really any game series in my opinion. I mean, in a way it's kind of like Run the Jewels discography. The majority of Run the Jewels discography could be 9 to 10s for some other artists, but because each album is so consistently good, it just gets a little bit more criticized as it goes on. Anyways though, at this point I'm completely rambling and off the rails. The last thing I'll say is please, please, please go support these games. Spelunky 1 and 2 are both pretty cheap on Steam. I think Spelunky 2 is sitting around $20. They pretty consistently go on sale as well. Darkest Dungeon 1 is also on Steam too. Unfortunately though, Darkest Dungeon 2 is only on Epic right now because they have an exclusive deal or whatever with Epic Store. But it will be on Steam a year from now, so that's pretty cool. Either way though, they're all pretty cheap. They're all right around $20, $30 or less. I would 100% please go check them out if these are the types of games you're into. There's no other game that feels like these games on the market at all. So with that, thanks for watching, guys. See you later.